Okay, before we dive in, a quick note. Everything discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Every parent and baby is different, so please consult your doctor, midwife, or healthcare provider for guidance specific to you and your little one.
It's your host, Nicolina, with you. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for settling in for another episode where we chat all things babies and parenthood and motherhood and all things around, this chaotic, crazy time in your life where we end up Googling a lot of questions that we need answers to, and Google's probably not the best place to get our answers, but that's my aim here with the podcast, is to speak to some amazing experts and to also share in my experience as well, so that we can make sure we get that right information out there to help you in all different aspects of babies and parenting. Now, today, our guest is Dr. Amy Norman. I want to preface this by saying I met Dr. Amy Norman while I was pregnant at an event, I want to say a couple of months ago now. I've completely lost track of time, so I'm in that newborn stage, so don't quote me specifically on any numbers. And she was doing a speech about her area of expertise. And I was just so captivated by it because I had only heard a little bit about pediatric chiropractors, but I just did not know how helpful they can be during this time, and just how beneficial it can be to see one, not just again in the pediatric space, but also in the pregnancy space as well. So I wanted to get her on to chat all about it. She's a pregnancy and pediatric chiropractor. She's based in Sydney and the founder of Dynamic Chiropractic New South Wales. Thanks so much for joining me, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
Well, I know, Amy, that you've got a really special interest in, I guess, supporting women and babies through all stages of life. As mentioned, that can, be from pregnancy through to all those future chapters that follow. And you're a mum yourself as well. What kind of really, I first want to ask you, what kind of really got you into this area and making sure that you were supporting mums and kids specifically in your area of expertise?
Yeah, so I've always had an interest in pediatric care. So even before I was a mum myself, I often was the person that was seeing a lot of the babies and the pregnant patients from like day dot essentially. But yeah, I think even down to things like teaching kids how to swim when I was at uni and all that kind of stuff, I've just always had a knack for all the different kids and their different personalities and whatever the day brings. I love that ultimate variable, right? Which is a kid. You just never know what you're going to get from person to person or from moment to moment. So I think only they did a recent census, and I think at the moment there's about 23% of chiropractors that see children. So it is quite niche. I did do a lot of stuff in functional neurology after I had graduated, and that kind of gave me a different lens on how I look at things. But I think pediatrics is just also something that, I always loved. And then once I became pregnant I just noticed that there was definitely a gap in terms of accessibility to quality healthcare. I think it's really tricky. Like, we should never really feel like being a mother, for example, is a barrier to accessing help. And I wanted to make a space where people could feel like it's, coming to a friend's place and the kids can play while we have a chat and do some bits and pieces. So that's how this space kind of evolved, and that really kicked off after I became a mother myself. So I guess I turned into my own avatar in lots of ways, but yeah, haven't looked back and love it here.
I love it. And, we were just chatting off recording because I obviously have little Hugo, and I was speaking to Amy. I was getting some advice from her about potentially coming in to see her. And the one thing you said to me on the call was, bring all the kids, let's make it a thing. So I love that you've created that space, especially at a time when mums can feel really overwhelmed coming to a million different appointments and getting to all different things with their babies. So I do love that. I want to start, Amy, if that's all right, speaking about, first, let's talk pregnancy and the support that I guess people out there can get from chiropractors during this time. Pregnancy is like a tough time on your body, you would know this as well going through it, especially when you get to your second or third pregnancy. Your body is really just on the verge of falling apart, at least mine was. And we don't tend to prioritize, like, I guess, helping ourselves out and giving ourselves the best chance to feel good and to feel like physically supported and to really focus on ourselves. Talk to me about what you see women who are pregnant for in this space, and when it may be needed or perhaps helpful to seek out a chiropractor.
Yeah, so there's almost a few different categories, I would say. So pain management is usually the primary thing, right? You've got some sort of pelvic girdle pain or you've got low back pain. And then, it could really kick off even from first trimester. So I often say first trimester is like opening the door for any old injuries to surface. Pardon me. Old injuries to surface so that you can get on top of it. And then once we get on top of what those injuries look like and you're pain free, it's then about maintaining optimal functioning. So I think a lot of the time, especially in Australia, we are a little bit more trained to be reactive rather than preventative, right? So a lot of the time it isn't initially a reactive issue that's really stopping you, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I've got the rest of my pregnancy to go. Like, how's this going to impact my birthing options and all those different bits and pieces? So firstly, make sure you're pain free. Because even though it's quite normalized, it's not, it's common, right? So that's also another little tangent I probably will go on to. But the other thing then, once you are pain free, it's about maintaining all those different postural changes that will inevitably happen when your body is fending against gravity with a growing bump and baby. So there'll be different waves, there'll be different growth spurts, there'll be different waves in what those hormones are like. So then you can get a little bit more laxity. So then you're feeling stiff because your muscles are guarding, because your ligaments are actually loose. And then it's things like getting enough space in your pelvis and making lots of available space essentially for baby to get into a good position for birth and a good position for that. So a lot of the time, sometimes we'll get people that come in because they found out they have a breech baby. And so we're trying to create space within the pelvis so that baby can do their thing and get head down. So it really depends on which period of time we catch people and what stage of life they're in. And you might find for your first pregnancy, I describe it as being like an unopened vacuum sealed bag. You can actually get away with a lot more in your first pregnancy. And I think a lot of the time we think, oh, what are all these other people whinging about? Like, I'm not having any problems. But then once you've given birth and your body's stretched before or anything like that, the timeline moves earlier. So I often say if it's your second, your third, your fifth baby, things that you might have only felt in your third trimester the first time might make a comeback tour a little bit earlier as well, because your body's done it before. And you might notice things like you show earlier, for example, and it's just another sign that our body goes, oh, yeah, I know what we're doing now. I'm going to, jump the gun a little bit and start making space a little bit earlier. So we want to keep people pain-free. We want to increase their mobility, because we know that if you are as mobile as you comfortably can be, it gives you so many more options in the birth space. You're more likely to go into labor spontaneously. So that in itself could be a thing, right? So then it might even reduce when you need to have pain relief. Like, the goal's not always to avoid pain relief completely. They're amazing and they're there for a reason. But if you've been cooking a problem for months and months and months to the point where you can't walk or you're finding it hard, then when we then fast forward to what we imagine our birth might be, that might mean that we're fatiguing earlier because we're tired. We haven't been sleeping well because we've been sore. And then, so yeah, you might need pain relief earlier. So there's a real ripple effect that will happen in our space. So ideally, I would rather see people as early as possible. And if they're going well, we space things out. And that way we can dodge pain entirely. That would be the dream. And then if not, we manage the problem and then keep them active and mobile and healthy all the way till baby comes.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, and that it can have that effect on your birth, because of course I know, like, birth, and there's all different types of birthing classes out there, hypnobirthing, this and that, and you do the birthing in the hospital the class in the hospital and all of that. But potentially really looking into your body and supporting your body during that process. And as you said, getting, not just baby in position, that's really interesting, but also just supporting all of your pain points to the point at which you're like, I feel like I'm sensing like you're in like peak performance when you get in there, so that you can give yourself the best shot,
Yeah.
once you get in there. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, we want to keep people active and mobile, right? Because it is a really big physical event, and you'll never see a marathon trainer not do any training for 6 months before an event. That doesn't happen, right? So we've got to work on these different bits and pieces to also promote good recovery as well. And I think a lot of the time pregnancy is that first window for some where they start actually listening to their body a little bit more. And then that's a tricky thing, because then postnatally we then shift our focus onto baby, and then we kind of, mum life, and it happens to all of us. So there's lots of different bits and pieces.
Definitely. And I wanted to talk about that transition as well, because as I said, all of a sudden once baby comes around, understandably, we do put a lot of focus on baby, and we start to kind of, ignore's not the right word, because it feels like, we're doing something wrong, but naturally we just, we kind of put ourselves to the side. Yeah. But one thing in particular I wanted to ask you about when it comes to physical support and where, chiropractic care might help, which you can give a bit of insight into, is breastfeeding support. With Hugo, he's my third baby, and I just went through a bit of a round of breastfeeding. Gosh, you do not realize how intense it can be on every part of your body. Everything from like the way you sit impacts, your shoulders, your neck, like every part of my body. I felt like after a session, I was like, did I sit right? Did I position that right? Because something's not feeling right. Tell me a bit about breastfeeding, that area, how we can take focus when it comes to our posture. And I guess what could also happen if we don't do it the right way, or if we don't put a little more thought into how we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, everything is impacted. Even your vision reduces during breastfeeding. So that's always a little bit of trivia. We go, oh my gosh, literally everything is getting impacted by breastfeeding. But yes, ergonomics is super important. And also, even depending on how you delivered baby, we'll add another layer to that as well. So say you've had an episiotomy, and then it means that you've got stitching on one side. So then even sitting completely neutral might irritate that area too. So there's like all these different like variables, but essentially the key basic things that we want to work on is making sure that we're trying to bring baby to us rather than us to them, which sounds a little bit weird, but it's so common because a lot of time we're so fixated on getting that latch right. And we're looking at what's happening in their lips, and we're making sure that they're not sucking their bottom lip under and all those different bits and pieces, that we find ourselves in this little shrug position, right?
Yeah. And we're super stiff. I was always felt like really stiff.
Are so tight. Yes. So you want to be getting heaps of pillows and things that will actually take the weight of your forearms so that you can drop your shoulders down. And then a lot of the time, depending on flow and things like that, might change how much you need to recline. But then a lot of the time, we are going to get neck tightness that happens from looking at baby. And that is also the beautiful thing about this stage of life as well, is it's really important for maternal bonding, but then also even for them getting that visual input from looking up at mum stimulates the brain. So at least ideally in the breastfeeding situation, you're changing from side to side. So even for those that are, for example, pumping and bottle feeding, I always say just when you are feeding, just switch sides so that you're still mimicking what they're getting. But yeah, just things like dropping your shoulders so that you can really not have your trap switched on all the time. Traps are tricky because they're just overactive and they micromanage everything and they don't let us relax. But then I think even stretching afterwards is really important too, after we settle them down and swaddle them and all the rest of it. So we want to be trying to encourage getting what we call like that thoracic extension, because everything in mum life is so forward orientated, right? We're changing them, we're transitioning them into the cot, we're putting them into the car, we're doing all these things where we are naturally hunched forward. So we want to make sure that we can try and open up our chest and really bring our arms back and lengthen our pecs as well, because it's very easy for us to be constantly in this tight position. But even things like just making sure you're not clenching. I think sometimes initially if we feel like that latch might not be amazing initially, it's very easy for us to kind of tense up in anticipation for that. So we want to make sure that we are relaxing what we can when we can. So making sure that we're not clenching, for example, because jaw stuff can even be such a thing that we overlook during that postpartum stage of life. But yeah, lots of pillows so that we've got the weight of baby supported. And keep in mind that if you are finding some of the ergonomics hard, that could also be a sign that baby is not in the best position for them to be able to comfortably feed as well. So I think sometimes we're really just so occupied on getting that nipple to the mouth, but even having, as much as we're thinking about all the different things that we're doing to change positioning, we forget about what we can do with baby as well to help their positioning. So if they have tension as well, that can also impact your ability to comfortably feed, to feel like you've had enough milk come out throughout that feed as well. So a lot of the time when we do have breastfeeding issues, it's very easy for us as mums to feel like it's a supply problem. But then don't forget that it's a team effort. And so it's very easy for us to underlook what's happening biomechanically with baby as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, that's an area that you can also help with, which is really interesting. Um, the other part of, I guess, still focusing on mum here is that I also always kind of like overlooked or forgot about was like the carrying of the baby. And like our body is I'm definitely at the stage at the moment as well with Hugo where he's so young, where like you just can't put him down in terms of like he'll go in the bouncer for maybe 5 minutes, so then 2 hours of his awake time I'm holding him. So I guess, do you have any tips there on, I guess, also supporting your body when the majority of the day you're holding a baby or you're burping a baby up top or you're placing a baby in the cot? There's just a lot of like holding. I know from experience speaking to a lot of mums as well, if you're rocking your baby, that can have issues. And there's just all these different things that happen during the day that I guess, we have to do. We can't just like leave the baby. But any suggestions on support there?
Yeah, so I think doing what we can to make such an ergonomically challenging phase of life manageable is key, right? There's no solution that completely avoids a lot of the ergonomic strain. So it is about balancing it where you can, hopefully getting a good carrier, for example, because then at least that weight is going to get transferred through your spine properly as well. Because if you are doing a lot of hip carrying and all that kind of stuff, not only are you going to get lots of forearm tightness, then you're also going to get hip pain and all those different bits and pieces. But yeah, if you get a good carrier that is supportive for their hips as well, super, super important. But then the great thing with that is typically you get your hands back and you can still be hands-free and still do a few bits and pieces where baby is upright and they're with you. And at the same time, I would often say, if you get the good carrier happening, it's actually better for their spine development than if they are necessarily having extended time in a bouncer or a capsule and all those different bits and pieces, because them being vertical is also how gravity loads into their spine, which actually forms development of their spine itself. So when they are born, the width of their vertebrae from top down are all roughly the same. But then as time happens and we're getting loading down in through their back, that's when the lower parts of our back that are supposed to be wider starts happening as well. So even though it can feel really ergonomically challenging, just remember, okay, it's good for the development long term. But other bits and pieces. So I would also say things like when we are maneuvering them, even things like being mindful of our hand positioning. There's a condition which has a really long name, but then the nickname for it is mother's thumb. And it's an inflammation of the tendon of your thumb. And a lot of the time it's because we're doing this all the time. So I refer to that as like Lego man hands. So in certain things where you can do Barbie hands or you can do mannequin hands, do that. So even like pushing the pram, you don't, unless you're doing like an incline or something where obviously you need to have a bit of a grip on it. But if it's a flat surface in your shopping center or whatever, just give the thumbs a break, rest them on there as well. Don't forget to do a little bit of like forearm stretching where you're just keeping your arms straight, you're bringing your wrist forward and back, because you're going to find that that's going to be really hard for us as well. But just trying to modify those ergonomics. So if you're bathing and you're then reaching over the bathtub, for example, get a little step stool so that you're sitting on there and you're a little bit closer. So just those little tiny things to reduce some of the ergonomical challenges can just take a little bit of those micro repetitions out of the way as well, right? So depending on what works for you, just, keeping in mind when we can, bending down by bending at the, knees and the hips rather than just folding at the waist. All those little tiny things will really send a peace offering to your body, because it's not typically, well, a lot of people will think, oh, it's this one thing that I did that blew my back out or whatever it is. You go, no, it's an accumulation of all these little micro things, which a lot of the time are not able to be avoided. But if we can just be a little bit savvier with tweaking those things just to make it a little less ergonomically challenging for us, perfect,
Yeah. And of course, like seeking help if you need, if you do get to that point where you're like, wow, like I'm really struggling, or the pain is getting worse, or whatever it may be. Of course, like information is key, like we're chatting right now on the podcast. So that's really important as well. With mums, of course, we feel like we can't look after ourselves at all during this time. Well, let's move on to babies, because of course one thing you specialize in is pediatric care, and it is hard to kind of wrap your head around the fact that babies might benefit from chiropractic care. I know you spoke in your talk a lot about this. Can you explain, I guess, what it can help with when it comes to babies?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the time when people that haven't had exposure to it, they're imagining all the brutal TikTok videos, and they're imagining it's like a WWE SmackDown kind of thing happening to your little baby. But no, a lot of the time it looks like gentle massage, because for the most part it is. We talk about the pressure that we would use is the same as when you're checking if an avocado is ripe, or the pressure that you would put on your own eyeball, like that's what you're giving a child. So I always remind people, we don't give children adult dosages, say, of Nurofen, for example. We're going to give them a tailored amount of care. So a lot of the time it is all gentle. Sometimes they sleep through, sometimes they're then ready for a sleep afterwards. So like that's how gentle we're talking, is a lot of it will just look like massage and a lot of light springing, essentially, if we find that there's a little bit of tightness. And the great thing is, because babies are so malleable, a little bit goes a long way. So there are even times where parents are like, oh, like that was it. I'm like, yeah, they can now move their head both ways, so they do not need more than what they have. Yeah, depending on what the primary issue is, will determine maybe some of the elements that might change a little bit. But for the most part, regardless of if they're telling me that they have, say, for example, a neck problem and they're only looking one way and they're not wanting to turn the other way, doing tummy time or whatever it is, I'm still going to check the whole body anyway. So there'll be tummy massages, and often there's, poos and farts that follow as well. We'll still be checking their spine as well, because depending on how their birth was, you're going to have different variables as well. If there's been a vacuum extraction or forceps where they're getting pulled by their neck, it's very different to being pushed out by the uterus, for example. If there was some, fast labor, or if there was a really slow labor where they were almost stuck for a period of time, they can get these little pulls or aches and pains that really impact then their movement, because birth is like so full on for mum, but also for baby. So I think we sometimes forget, because even though they don't work and they don't have a 9-to-5 job, birth has been really full on, but also they're learning all these new things from scratch. They're learning how to move against gravity from scratch, right? So all those different milestones will kind of determine what the projects might be, but it could be things like they're not enjoying tummy time, or sometimes even if they look like they're really strong initially, that's often sometimes a bit of a flag there for me, because they're not actually supposed to be strong for that period of time. So that could be more tightness than strength, because they haven't been training their neck muscles in utero. So if they're pretty much doing a really big upright tummy time from day dot, you kind of go, oh, I think there might be just something worth checking as well. But yeah, constipation, digestive stuff, sometimes we get the feeding side of things as well. So we'll actually put a glove on. We'll put we'll put our finger in through their mouth, and we'll actually have a feel and see what their suck is like and their ability to maintain that. So they might have a little bit of tension underneath their tongue that we might be releasing. We might be having a feel and seeing what potentially mum is feeling as well. So there are times where we go check baby suck and we go, oh, you're getting a lot of rubbing of your nipple against their hard palate, for example. And they go, yeah. And we go, okay, that's why you've got that shallow latch happening, because their tongue is pushing them forward, for example. So we also do get a lot of information by actually placing a finger in through their mouth and seeing what they're doing. But yeah, it's this vast world that a lot of people don't know about, which is totally fair. But that's hopefully with podcasts like this, we can increase awareness, because yeah, just think about how many people have unfortunately had to wrap up their breastfeeding journey sooner than they would have liked, because just things weren't working the way that it could, so that it would be sustainable for them and for baby as well, right?
Yeah, of course. And I think also just equipping, I guess, mums and dads with the information so that they can seek help if they need, right? Because I think a lot of the time we tend to just tell ourselves, oh no, like I'm just going crazy, oh, that's fine. Like, no, I'll just sit through the painful latch, or no, like surely, tummy time's going fine, or whatever, like, because you have so much, I guess, on your plate to track when it comes to a baby. I guess maybe, yeah, leaning in and asking those questions and seeking some help and some advice to see if you could be assisted, or baby could be assisted, right?
Yeah, and it's not always that they're going to grow out of it. And I think that's a common thing as well that gets underlooked with pediatric care, is we just assume with time it gets better. And in some components, yes, it might, but what has their body had to do to compensate with that issue? So I think sometimes that's also the thing that we forget about, is that, yeah, they might not, they might eventually be doing something, but then what have they had to do to adapt to that as well? So it's just a tricky balance. And I think also just with so much conflicting stuff out there, I think it can make it really hard, because in lots of ways, accessibility to education is, as easy as it's ever been. But knowing the quality of information and knowing if it's reputable, and alongside just people typically normalizing problems as well. Like, that's also a problem, right? Everyone's got a war story. And it's like, you don't get a gold medal for doing things the hard way.
Of
So
course.
if there's a way that we can find things manageable, if we can, then, and accessibility's there, then we should.
Yeah, certainly so. Well, Amy, thank you so much for chatting through it, because this is a really interesting one. And I mentioned that when I was when I was listening to your talk at this event where I was at, like, I had in the back of my mind, I think, a couple or two that I had spoken to who mentioned that they went to a pediatric chiropractor. And I always just wondered, I was like, what do you mean? And what is it helpful for? And how does it all come together? So it's really interesting to see that. And it's also really good to know that, it's something that mums can seek out in terms of, some help, but also babies, toddlers, as you mentioned, you work with kids of all ages. So something for people to think about and to definitely look into if they need.
And the reassurance that it's safe. There was a really big study that happened in Melbourne, and the results from that was, very, very promising. So we're talking 97% plus people reporting positive outcomes, and no adverse events to chiropractic care for babies have been reported in that research as well. So just that reassurance that it isn't this primal, barbaric, woo or dangerous thing, and that it is just like we're giving them the support that they need to help you enjoy this stage of life, because you should.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Amy. It's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.